Welcome, everybody, to the first edition of the rebooted Believe in White Sox podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on a Monday morning. We're recording this on Sunday evening after another White Sox loss. My name is Greg Mroz. It's a pleasure to have you along for the ride, and thank you for joining us here on Believe in White Sox. A little bit about myself. I am a former minor league baseball broadcaster. I was a play-by-play man for four different minor league teams, three affiliated, one independent. And then I spent the last 5 seasons as the research manager for the Pac 12 network. So I was basically getting into the minutia of college sports statistics, but I'm a lifelong Chicago White Sox fan. I've had a chance to broadcast against the Great Falls Voyagers, a White Sox Rookie League affiliate, for 2 years. So that's really my only experience in terms of actually covering the White Sox on a day-to-day basis. But this is an interesting period in time to be talking about the Chicago White Sox. And as you join us on this journey here on Believe in White Sox, we ask you to like, subscribe, do anything you can to help promote the show. We are going to do the same thing as well. I know that we are going to have a lot of growth here. It's going to take some time, but I hope that you stick with me. I hope you tell your friends. I hope your friends tell their friends. And I hope their friends tell some random guy on the street, because you know what? Word of mouth, I think, is the best way to be able to spread any new venture that one is doing. So I like to, in a situation like this, where this show, this feed has been on hiatus for a while with some previous hosts, I want to get into what I'm calling the state of the Chicago White Sox. Because I think that this franchise, maybe more than any franchise in baseball right now, is kind of up creek without a paddle. And the reason why I say that is that the 2024 Chicago White Sox, and I don't want to spend more time talking about this year's team in relation to what it means in this year more than I need to. And the reason why I say that is that the Chicago White Sox are going to be the first team to 60 losses. They'll be at 65 losses potentially by the end of June. By the time it hits July 1st, which is exactly a week from today, the Chicago White Sox very easily could have 65 losses. On this day, they are now 20-58. That's 78 games in. So if you give them the benefit of the doubt and give them, I would say, two more losses and one more win, at the exact halfway point in this season, they are going to end up, and I'm going to have to try and do my mental math here a little bit, they're going to be 21-60. That's almost 40 games under 500. I think a lot of people knew that this year's team was not going to be good, but I think that knowing that this year's team was going to be this bad is a far cry from where I think we were at the start of the 2022 season. I really think that you can actually go 5 years into the past. You guys remember those choose your own adventure books that you read as kids, where you could read a couple of pages and say you could go to page 6 if you want to do this, you go to page 7 if you want to do that. And sometimes you could find a pot of gold, or you could end up falling off a cliff. To be quite frank, I haven't read a choose your own adventure book in quite some time, so I don't actually know if that's the case or not. But the Chicago White Sox seemingly took the wrong page in every step of their choose your own adventure journey. We'll go back to 2019 and where we thought this team was going to be, with the peak of the rebuild before they're going to get into contention. I remember sitting in my office when Dallas Keuchel got signed in the 2020 offseason, or rather, I'd say 2019 leading into 2020 offseason. And you figured, you've got Lucas Giolito, who has refound himself. You are hopefully going to end up with a rotation that at some point contains Dylan Cease and Dane Dunning. And Carlos Rodon, if he could figure it out, could end up being one of the best pitchers in baseball. I remember covering him back in collegiate baseball. Gosh, now that seems like ages ago, but Carlos Rodon was one of the best collegiate pitchers that we had seen in quite some time, coming out of North Carolina State, drafted one pick ahead of Kyle Schwarber. COVID happens and the world goes to hell, or seemingly goes to hell. We have a 60-game Major League Baseball season. Jose Abreu has the MVP year that he does in a 60-game year. The White Sox were, for the majority of the time, the best team in the American League. They were the best team in the American League, I feel like, the majority of that season. And then they fell off in the final couple of weeks. And in a 60-game sample size, it means a lot to where you go from the 2 seed to the 7 seed, and they end up coming out to Oakland. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, and probably a lot of you don't know, I live on the West Coast. I am currently doing this show from my apartment in San Francisco. So if you're probably wondering why there's just random stuff behind me, if you live in a one-bedroom apartment, it's pretty difficult to set up a great recording studio, but I am doing the absolute best I can with what I have. So I appreciate all of you standing with me. And if you do have some critiques on my setup, please send them in. I will do my best to fix them, but there are certain things that, unfortunately, I just can't fix. You go into that wild card series in Oakland, and it was pretty clear, if it wasn't already, that Rick Renteria had a problem with bullpen management. Especially, I remember them bringing in Carlos Rodon having, I think, either minimal or no career relief appearances up to that point. I don't have his baseball reference page up in front of me, so I'm just going to have to go off of that. And I think it was at that moment that Rick Hahn decided that Rick Renteria was not going to be the manager that was going to lead this team into the next generation. I don't think Rick Hahn wanted to hire Tony La Russa. I think that, and I remember specifically listening to conjecture about it at the time, that you could have easily hired A.J. Hinch coming off of his termination by the Astros in the sign stealing scandal. As a San Francisco resident, it was pretty clear to me that Bruce Bochy never wanted to retire. Farhan Zaidi had a very deep relationship with Gabe Kapler, and I think with Farhan Zaidi coming in as the Giants president of baseball operations, they wanted to go their own way. And Bruce Bochy, I thought, was the best manager available. He knew how to adapt analytics with an old school approach. I thought he should have been the guy. But, and I put this to somebody in a really interesting way. If you break up with your girlfriend at age 25 years old, you shouldn't try and buy her a mansion when she's 60 and having gone through several previous marriages. That's what I felt like it was when, effectively, and we can say what remains unsaid, is that Jerry Reinsdorf hired Tony La Russa, not Rick Hahn. That 2021 season was a good year, but you also had a trade in which the White Sox gave up Dane Dunning to get Lance Lynn and effectively win now. And Lance Lynn had a great year. Lance Lynn had 2 really solid years with the Chicago White Sox in 2021 and 2022. Unfortunately, they ran into the Houston Astros in a rotation that you thought was going to be elite with Lynn, Giolito, Dylan Cease, Dallas Keuchel, and hoping at some point in the future to work in Michael Kopech. I can't. I can actually look it up, and we'll talk about it on future episodes about who, the compilation of that 2021 pitching staff and the decision that was made to bring in a second closer in Craig Kimbrell. But that 2021 White Sox team was good. They could have been better, but there was so much noise around that team. The Yermin Mercedes incident and the Liam Hendricks having to pinch run at second base because Tony La Russa didn't know the new extra inning rules. All this stuff that the White Sox waded through in a very bad American League Central. Then you get to 2022, they completely underperform at the start of the year. And while they fought to stay in it, there's just something about it that said that this team they weren't on track to do anything significant. And that was a disappointment. Tony La Russa has his health issues, and he ends up resigning. Dallas Keuchel, I actually remember I was in the bleachers for Dallas Keuchel's final start in late April 2022 before he got outright released. This was a guy that you thought was going to be the number 1 or number 2 guy in your rotation, a former Cy Young winner, and he ends up getting straight up cut because he's that bad. And then the White Sox move on from Miguel Cairo, their interim manager, and again, you have an opportunity to go out and hire Bruce Bochy, which the Texas Rangers did, and look what that ended up doing for them. It ended up working out pretty darn well. So the White Sox come into this 2023 season thinking they're going to be better than people think. They've moved on from Jose Abreu at this point, which I didn't love at the time, but seeing as Jose Abreu has now since been released by the Houston Astros, it was probably the right move. They sign Andrew Benintendi to what ends up being the largest free agent contract in White Sox history, and they completely flop. They lose 100 games. Pedro Grifol ends up throughout the year being somewhat found out as really over his skis in this role. And the one thing that I want to say is that I don't want to ever criticize somebody at the highest level because they have that job for a reason. They are the best at what they do. But I think it is fair to criticize decisions in terms of personnel that were made. And you look at where the White Sox are now, and there's very little about the current composition of this team that is going to be around when this team is competitive again. And that to me is the sad part. You look at some of the contracts, and I'm looking at some of the contracts here, and you have to look at the Yohan Moncadas of the world, a guy that has 1 year left on his deal, $25 million in 2025. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2026. The White Sox can't get rid of that deal. And at this point, given that he has underperformed and he hasn't been able to stay healthy, I don't think Yohan Moncada is part of the future. You look at Eloy Jimenez. Eloy Jimenez is somebody that, and I remember NBC Sports Chicago running a graphic about how many times he's been on the injured list. I remember when I was covering him when he was a Cubs minor leaguer, he had a home run off of Mariners farmhand at the time, Darren Gillies in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that might still be going to dead away center field. Eloy Jimenez has got 2 years left on his deal. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2027. And at this point, unless you're going to eat some of that salary, I think Eloy Jimenez, you're just going to have to hope that he finds his way. But the problem is he's not going to be on a team that's going to win. He's not going to be on a team that's going to win. But I do want to think about two guys that I think are really important to the future and the present of the Chicago White Sox. There's been a lot of conjecture over them wanting to trade Luis Robert. And Luis Robert has been injured off and on the last couple of years. And he has not been great since he's come back from injury. But the talent is undeniably still there. And he had a career year last year. Like last year was the year where you look at Luis Robert and you say, like, this is a guy that is going to end up being one of your cornerstones for years to come. But the problem is that you can get a lot for him now. And I don't think that you're going to be able to get that much for him in the future, given that the White Sox are just not going to have that much leverage. I want Luis Robert to stay around because he is that talented and he is somebody that you can build a franchise around. The problem is that I don't think the White Sox are in a position to where they're going to be competitive to a point where by the time it comes to pay Luis Robert a lot of money, they're not going to be in a competitive position and he's going to be able to go somewhere else where he'll be able to make more money and he'll be able to win. I think it's just sad how the White Sox have gotten to a point where they're non-competitive and some of the guys that were part of this rebuild are gone. Like the guys that you thought were going to be part of a competitive team that could win a World Series year in and year out. And I'm not saying that they were going to win a World Series year in and year out, but have a chance to compete for a World Series year in and year out. Lucas Giolito, injured, gone. And they traded him during the middle of last year. He didn't last in Anaheim very long before he ended up in Cleveland and now in Boston and hoping that he can, reboot what is one of the most talented arms in Major League Baseball. Liam Hendricks, after coming back from leukemia in just a remarkable way, I apologize. I got to remember whether or not Liam Hendricks had leukemia or whether he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I want to make sure that I get that right. So it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, so my apologies. But the way that he came back from that and yet still ended up injuring himself and tearing his UCL and having to have Tommy John surgery. Now he's on the Red Sox as well. Chris Getz in the offseason said that he did not like their team. But that didn't mean that you had to necessarily get rid of every single piece that you did. And what I mean by that is you needed to keep some of the guys that had that talent that you were hoping was going to be a part of the near distant future. And one of those guys was Dylan Cease. I didn't think they needed to trade Dylan Cease. Dylan Cease did not have the kind of 2023 that he did in 2022. So I thought trading him was a mistake. That being said, the other guy that I think they need to keep and make sure that he is a part of their franchise for a long time is Garrett Crochet. Garrett Crochet, given that he missed a year due to injury, he is not into his first ARB year until next year. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2027. You can do what Rick Hahn did with a lot of these guys and extend him for a high value early and have him be the starting pitcher that you build around. He was your first round pick in 2020. He ended up making his big league debut the same year, which is an issue that I do want to talk about on future episodes in terms of how the White Sox go about player development, because I think that there is some issues, and in particular with Andrew Vaughn, that I think have come to light in terms about how the White Sox draft and develop and how they choose to move their prospects up and down throughout their system. It's a little bit different than a lot of the organizations that I was around in terms of how they draft, where they assign their prospects to start out. And I don't know what the status of Andrew Vaughn is for the long-term future of this team. You look at where his contract situation is, as I have Spot Track up here on my little monitor to the side. He's going into 2 ARB years, and then he will be an unrestricted free agent in 2027. So you're going to have to make a decision on him at some point. But I think he'll probably settle for a 1-year deal on his first ARB year next year, second ARB year next year, and then move him forward and see if there is a trade market for him. I like Andrew Vaughn. I called some of his games while he was at Cal. I still think that he was the right pick in the 2019 draft behind Bobby Witt Jr. I just don't necessarily think that he is going to end up being the guy. He's just not going to end up being the guy that White Sox fans want him to be. And to me, that's a little bit unfortunate because he's got so much talent. He's got a lot of power. Unfortunately, he's just not that fast. And I think we saw some of that when the White Sox tried playing him in the outfield just to get his bat onto the roster in the 2021 season and partially in 2022 before they let Jose Brady walk out the door. But then when you're talking about Luis Robert, you look at a guy that he's going to make $20 million in 2026 and 2027. So he is still under contract, full contract through the 2027 season. Keep him. See what you can do to build around him. Unless you feel like you can get a return back for him at this deadline that is going to give you 3 future starters in the field. Because right now, if you want to look at the White Sox diamond and say, who is going to be a long-term starter at their position? I don't know if that's the case for Andrew Vaughn at first. I don't think that's the case, obviously, for Nicky Lopez playing second base. Shortstop, and we'll talk about what happened with Paul DeJong the other night. I think Paul DeJong is going to end up being a guy that, you sign so you can trade him. He's having a decent year power-wise. If you're not going to get a lot of return for Paul DeJong, but maybe you get something. There are guys on this team right now, the Yohan Moncadas of the world and the Andrew Benintendis of the world, that are just not tradable. It's same with Eloy Jimenez. So there's some guys on this roster that you're stuck with. And then there are the guys on this roster that you're questioning why they're here. The Tommy Phams of the world. Why are you signing Tommy Pham to a minor league deal? And granted, he's had a productive year. But why are you signing a 36-year-old Tommy Pham to a minor league deal when you're not going to compete? Maybe it's just so that they can flip him for somebody for some future assets at the deadline that might turn into something 2 years from now. The Mike Clevenger thing, and I know what the conjecture has been on Mike Clevenger, and I don't really want to talk about it. I don't think that they needed to sign him in the first place last year, and I don't know why they rushed to sign him. I don't think that it was right after they got off to a historically bad start to sign him again this year. So he's not going to be a part of the future. Eric Fetty's a guy that he has been good at times, but again, this is a 2-year contract for a guy that was playing overseas. He's not going to be a part of a competitive nature, so maybe you get some value for him if a team that's contending. And you have to look at, and I think this is going to be a big part of what we talk about leading into the trade deadline. You look at the way that the National League wild card is right now, and there are 8 teams. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm gonna find it because I want to make sure that I get this right. And there's a little secondary monitor for those of you that are watching on video that is lower to my left. So want to make sure that you understand why I keep like looking away from the camera, and I don't want to be staring into your soul. And for those that are listening on the podcast, this is all completely irrelevant minutia to you, so you don't have to necessarily worry too much about that. But you look at the National League wildcard standings right now, and as I have to do math, and granted, sometimes even for a stats guy like me, math is hard. The last wild card spot is currently shared by the St. Louis Cardinals and the San Diego Padres. With the exception of the Colorado Rockies and the Miami Marlins, there are 7 teams that are within 3 games of the final wild card spot right now. And considering that the Cardinals and the Padres are both tied for the last 2 wild card spots, you're for the majority of this year going to have 9 teams in the National League that are going to be competing for 2 wild card spots. I say that to say that you have assets that you can sell to one of those teams, including your rivals up the red line at Wrigley Field. Should you want to engage in a trade with them again, there are guys that you can sell up there that could end up putting them over the top. That's the decision that Chris Getz has to make. And the White Sox have to make some tough decisions about their long-term future. And that's why I say the state of the White Sox. Who in this current iteration of players, this collection of players, is going to be a part of this team 3 to 4 years from now? If you are evaluating and saying, I want this guy to be a part of my team, here are the guys that I definitely know I want to be a part of my team 3 to 4 years from now. Luis Robert Jr., Garrett Crochet, and I could make an argument for Corey Lee. But you've got to see Corey Lee play a little bit more. And I want to get into the whole Martin Maldonado thing in future episodes because I can't believe that they're still playing him as much as they are. You know, for a time, everybody was joking that his batting average wasn't even legally drunk. His batting average was under the legal drinking limit. So I don't necessarily know who else pitching wise you necessarily want to keep, but Garrett Crochet is the guy that I do see as a part of this team years from now. I'm excited to see what Drew Thorpe has. Jonathan Cannon, I think, has some potential, although he got knocked around today, only lasted an inning, gave up 8 runs. So, but Garrett Crochet is definitely somebody that I think is going to be a part of this team in the future. And maybe, I was going to say Jesse Schultens, but he's 30 years old. He's still pre-arbitration. I don't think that he's somebody that's a part of this future. We need to do a full holistic evaluation of the White Sox current prospect system. And I think that when we talk about the draft, that's going to be a big part of who we see in, I guess they're going to call it rate field now that Guaranteed Rate is changing their name to Rate. But again, I'm not necessarily positive on that at this point. So the state of the White Sox at this point is they're a team that has had a historically bad year. They had a historically bad 24-game start. They had a career or a franchise worst losing streak in May, which by all accounts, I don't think I ever would have seen in my lifetime. And they don't know whether or not they're in a rebuild or not. And I think that Chris Getz is going to have to make some hard decisions about, number one, who's going to be the next manager of this team. Because I don't think this team collectively is that talented relative to the rest of Major League Baseball. But I think that with a better manager and somebody that inspires a little bit more hope, that you could find a way to get this thing back on track quicker than a 4 to 5 year timeline. That's my hope. That's my vision. So we're going to keep these episodes relatively short, usually in the range of 25 to 30 minutes. I don't want to go on for longer than we necessarily need to. If we have guests on, we'll go a little bit longer. But in this, the state of the White Sox, all I want to say is that this is going to be a show where we're going to look big picture. We want to look big picture. In 2019, I started off the show with this. In 2019, I think we had a lot better visions for what this team was going to be in 2024 than what it ended up being. Everything went off the rails. Now the question is, can it get back on the rails before people start losing interest for a long time? Are the White Sox at this point trending toward becoming the soon-to-be Sacramento and then maybe Las Vegas Athletics? I hope not. I live in the Bay Area, and I've seen what's happened to the Oakland Athletics franchise over the last few years, and it's heartbreaking. And I don't want to see the same thing happen to the White Sox, because White Sox fans are great fans, and they deserve better. And when you see an empty ballpark, don't criticize White Sox fans for that. They shouldn't have to pay for a product that frustrates them and to not be listened to. So it's going to be difficult, but I hope that we'll provide for you. And some of the things that I do want to actually get into as we lead up to the draft, I want to do some draft profiles and see who the White Sox are going to be targeting with their pick in the first round. Is it going to be somebody that you feel like is going to be up here in a couple of years, or somebody that you might have to wait around 5 to 6 years to see because they're a high school pick? We're going to do some draft analysis. We're also going to do on this show some historical analysis. I want to look back at some of the best teams in the history of the Chicago White Sox. I want to look back at 83. I want to look back at some of the teams in the early 90s, maybe the team in 94 that was potentially going to win the AL pennant before the strike happened. The 2000 Chicago White Sox, obviously the World Series winning team. The 08 Chicago White Sox that I thought was a team that could have been a lot better than they actually were. We're going to look back at the past and do a historical analysis of the past, because I think that in an era where White Sox baseball is difficult to talk about in its present state, we have to find ways to invigorate the joy as White Sox fans, and that could be by talking about the past. And so with that, we will say goodbye. We're going to try and get you a Monday, Wednesday, Friday recording every week. That's going to be our goal. We're going to have episodes out for you on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So your next episode is going to be this upcoming Wednesday. Looking at the White Sox schedule for what is upcoming this week, just because I think that we want to talk a little bit about the present, because the present is indeed still relevant for how much you want to enjoy it or not. The White Sox, oh boy, they've got a tough week ahead of them. So tonight, they're going to be facing off against the LA Dodgers, 3-game series against the Dodgers, then a makeup game from a postponed game against the Atlanta Braves on what was supposed to be an off day on Thursday, and then maybe the White Sox can win a series as the Colorado Rockies come to town. So it'll be Dodgers, one against the Braves, and then Rockies on a 7-game homestand to close out the month of June. Let's hope, for the sake of the White Sox, that they are not at 60 losses by the end of June. More than likely now at 58 losses, that's going to be the case, but we shall certainly see. You can follow me on Twitter at Greg Mroz, and if you see this show, you're probably already following me on Twitter. You can also follow me on Instagram at Wizard of Mroz 22. We're going to be trying to clip some videos to put on my social channels. I'm still in the midst of trying to figure out a lot of, what's going to end up being the best clips, but I don't know how much of this show is actually clippable, but we're going to do our absolute best to deliver you a great product. So, that is going to be it for us on the relaunch of Believe in White Sox. Thank you so much for joining me. We will talk to you on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your Monday. We will talk to you soon. Southsiders, there is hope. I promise you, there is hope. We will talk to you very soon.